What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast, episode 145. Today is Tuesday, January 31st, 2023. Today we're reviewing both conference championship games, going over the keys to victory for both the Chiefs and the Eagles. But before that, joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Wink. What's up?
A chilly, wintry, icy Tuesday afternoon here in Austin, Texas, which you don't really think of that when you think about Austin and smack dab in the middle of Texas. But my classes were canceled today, and they've just been canceled tomorrow. So got kind of lucky here, but excited to be back. Last day of January already. It feels like we're just getting used to saying 2023. And a month has already passed by. So we've got one game left. It's going to be a great one between the Chiefs and the Eagles that we'll be breaking down more in depth. I'm guessing next week will be all Super Bowl content. So that should be fun. We haven't discussed exactly what that will look like, but we'll figure it out. And but today we wanted to do this possibly yesterday, didn't get around to it. We're going to be talking about the conference championship games. So let's just go ahead, waste no time, and get right into it.
Yep. Let's start with the NFC Championship. Oh, actually, no. We had breaking news about an hour ago that we're just going to touch on really fast before we get to the games. Sean Payton just got traded to the Denver Broncos for a first-round pick in 2023 and a future second-round pick that hasn't been disclosed yet. What were your initial thoughts of the trade? Just raw thoughts, just from it happening about an hour ago.
Well, it's big time. Initially, I think over the past week or two, my general feeling from what I was hearing from different sources in the media was that Sean Payton was in sort of a exploratory phase, but he was leaning towards staying at Fox and waiting until the right opportunity presented itself. But according to sources, he had great meetings with the Broncos last week. The Broncos also talked to Jim Harbaugh, who I think is, of course, staying at Michigan. And I mean, I don't blame him for that. He's in a great situation right now. He has that program going in the right direction with a good quarterback. But the bottom line here is, I think the thing that stands out the most is with everything that the Broncos have now invested in, both Russell Wilson and now Sean Payton. I'm not exactly sure what they're going to be paying Sean Payton, but regardless, with all the draft capital that they now invested in their coach and their quarterback, this needs to work out. I think there's a lot of pressure now from just an outside perspective for this to work out and for them to be playoff contenders, not only come next year, but the year after and the year after through the entirety of Russell Wilson's contract. So those were my initial thoughts. We're not going to go too deep into it. We'll have a separate episode for coaching hires.
Yeah. I'll just say this. I think the new Broncos ownership definitely paid dividends. Their willingness to go out and spend big money to get the right people into the building, that makes a huge difference. And I think for someone like Sean Payton, who had his full set of options and was going to be picky about what option he would end up choosing, having owners that are completely committed to winning, I think that plays a huge role in Sean Payton ending up in Denver. And one last thing is, I think Sean Payton, for him to end up in Denver, shows that he has some belief in this Russell Wilson situation turning around. So if you're a Denver fan, if you got, Sean Payton's stamp of approval, then you should feel a lot better about your situation going into next year. But let's move right along here. Get to the content that we're all here for, what's in the title. Let's talk NFC Championship. This game I believe it ended up being 31-7, but
Yep.
it just for a while it felt like, they were kind of matching up. They were kind of feeling each other out physically. And then once that happened, um, by the time things started to play out, it was already, two quarterbacks into it for the 49ers side of things. So it was disappointing from a fan standpoint. I think the fans are the biggest losers in this situation because this was supposed to be a fantastic game, and I believe it would have been a fantastic game if Brock Purdy was able to stay in um, for the entire game and not get injured. But it played out the way it did, and you know you just got to give credit to the Eagles because I mean they didn't mess around with the 49ers when they got a little bit flustered once Brock Purdy was out of the game. The Eagles took advantage of each situation that came to them, and you got to give credit for that. And to anyone who's discrediting the Eagles Super Bowl run, um, I'll be quick to say that this Eagles team is 100% legit, and you can't ignore the fact that they dominated the line of scrimmage, defensively and offensively. And that was the matchup that we said going into the game would decide the game, and ultimately, they dominated on both sides of the ball.
Right. No, you're exactly right. Everything you said, I agree with. Um, Look, this was a matchup that we thought going into this Sunday was going to be possibly like an all-time great conference championship, just because of the way that these two teams matched up, and not particularly because their quarterbacks stand out or anything else stand out, but it's just these were two rosters coming into the game that, quite frankly, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to point out any holes in these rosters. I mean, there are a couple weaknesses here and there, but these were two of the more, if not the two most well-rounded rosters in the entire National Football League. And they were going to match up with each other. Brock Purdy had a lot of success, but at the end of the day, uh, this was a case of the 49ers being undone once again by quarterback injuries. And it's unfortunate from a fan perspective, especially for San Francisco fans and for just diehard and casual football fans, even just from a TV product perspective. But you have to give credit to the Eagles at every single level. First of all, Howie Roseman, the general manager. I think this organizational philosophy of buying into really building your team from the inside out, from the offensive and defensive lines first, outwards. I think they're the example now in the National Football League. And if you want to compete now in the NFC, because I don't see this Eagles team going anywhere anytime soon, you're going to have to be able to match up with their physicality and with their depth on both sides of the ball. Now, I know the Eagles have some aging veterans on that offensive line, but they're showing no signs of slowing down anytime soon. So I think the organizational philosophy from the top down, they were all aligned. And they have depth on both sides, which is scary. And I think their physicality was really a separator, especially late in the game. You got to give credit to Nick Sirianni for how he managed this game. I thought he was aggressive. And look, in these sorts of games against really good teams, even with a lesser talent at quarterback position, you got to be aggressive. And aggressiveness, not only off the field in the offseason, like we've seen with the 49ers going to get Christian McCaffrey. Now, like we've seen with the Broncos, hopefully this pays off with Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. I mean, aggressive wins now in the National Football League. And Nick Sirianni, give him credit, he managed with aggressiveness. On the first drive, they faced a 4th and 3. I believe on the Niners side of the field, they went for it. They converted. That led to a touchdown. Then I believe it was, later in the second quarter with 6 minutes and 39 seconds remaining. They faced a 4th and 1 from their own 34-yard line. And this was when the game was still sort of hanging in the balance. I believe it was tied 7-7 or they were up 14-7, but still, the 49ers were still sort of hanging around. Christian McCaffrey had a fantastic second quarter, and they were hanging around. They were leading on McCaffrey. Josh Johnson was still doing a fairly good job of keeping this team in the game, but Eagles went for it, and that led to what you saw at the end of the half, which really swung the game. 2 touchdowns going into halftime. They got the running game going. And then finally, Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni for managing the game aggressively, and Jalen Hurts. I don't think he's still 100%. I think you could see that, but I think his miss, just from what I was watching, he seemed to miss low a lot. And I'm not sure you can afford to miss that many throws in the Super Bowl against a Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. But give him credit. Didn't turn the ball over. He took care of the ball. He has this quiet poise about him. He doesn't get rattled. And he knew when to use his legs, especially in that second half. And he managed the game perfectly. So I think credit has to go out to all 3 levels. Not just for this game on Sunday, but for this entire season. Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni, who we had questions about even coming into this year, and at the very top, Howie Roseman. They all have a certain slice of this pie in the Eagles' success in 2022, 2023. And we're not going to get into the Super Bowl yet, but I think it's a fantastic matchup.
Right. Yeah, and the Eagles, we talked about it throughout the year. Just the way they're built is the ideal way to build a team. You start from the trenches and build your way out. And obviously, getting the quarterback right plays a big part in that, of course. But once you have the trenches, figured out, then you can, make big moves for all the other positions. And that's exactly what they did. They made trades for wide receiver talent, cornerbacks, Darius Slay, obviously, and then CJ Gardner Johnson and that safety spot. I mean, all over that team is examples of, high quality team building. And another example of that is, of course, the fact that they have the Saints first round pick. They're going to have a top 15 pick in this year's draft,
Right.
after winning the Super Bowl, possibly. So, I think Howie Roseman, from 2018 onward, you could argue has been the best GM in the National Football League. Everything past that Jalen Reagor pick has been flawless, in my opinion.
Just imagine if this team had Justin Jefferson, which is who they should have picked with that Jalen Reagor pick. But then kind of brings into question, would they have traded for A.J. Brown? But still, I mean, it still would have been as dangerous, if not more dangerous than they are now. And one more thing I want to mention before we possibly move on. We all know what the Eagles have along the defensive line, along that defensive front, what makes them so dominant. I mean, 70 sacks this year, plus whatever they had, last week and then this week. It's like an all-time great pass rush. Not only because of the talent they have up front, but because of how the wealth is spread. They don't just have 1 or 2 guys that are dominating. It's everybody. It's a collective effort. And they have depth basically at every position. And so they're able to keep fresh up front. So that pass rush is just unrelenting the entire game. And eventually you might be able to contain it for a quarter or maybe 2 quarters, but it's eventually going to wear on that offensive line. And that's why it's so effective. But Hassan Reddick, man, what an underrated offseason pickup by Howie Roseman. And this just further legitimizes his status as possibly the best general manager in the National Football League. They move him to outside linebacker, and man, I think the Cardinals, who he started his career with, and the Panthers, who he spent a year with, are sort of regretting the fact that they didn't realize that this guy would be better suited playing off the edge than he was at middle linebacker where he started his career. 19 sacks in 19 and a half games. That's just ridiculous. He was a huge difference maker and has been a huge difference maker all season long for the Eagles.
Yeah, and a lot of people question that signing also. Like that's an underrated part is the fact that, when they went out and got Hassan Reddick, a lot of people, question that move and the amount of money they're paying him, but he's been worth every single penny, if not more. And um, to your point of them being an all-time great pass rush, I don't know if we've seen a pass rush this good since maybe the 2015 Broncos. I think that's the one I would think of, but
Yeah.
Even then, you could argue this group is deeper.
Right. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't. I mean, that's a different argument for another day, but I certainly wouldn't argue with that right now, the way they're playing. So if that's all that needs to be said, we can move on to the AFC Championship game, which, quite frankly, was the better of the two games. Before we actually get into the game itself, I think something needs to be addressed. That's been a big hot topic coming out of that game that I don't love just because it's not really football. And it seems to come up every year with officiating and how these games are being officiated. You have some fans who are saying the game is rigged, which I don't really buy into all that much. But at the same time, the officiating has been poor. I think all playoffs long. I'm not going to say like one call or this call definitely like decided the game. No, I don't think it did. But what are your general thoughts on the officiating, some of the calls that were not just made in this game, but have been made in games past of these NFL playoffs?
Well, I think there's a general belief that, when the playoffs start, the game has to be called differently. Just from a standpoint of the wide receivers and cornerbacks should be able to hand fight a little bit more, you know, um, little things here and there in terms of physicality should be let go. And that hasn't seemed to be the case, especially in these championship games. We didn't talk about the officiating much with 49ers Eagles, but there were some pretty questionable calls in that game as well. But particularly in this game, I think of, the pass interference they called on, um, I believe it was Mike Hilton on the sideline where
Yep.
he made that dive for the ball. He had his hand on the right hip of the receiver, but it wasn't a large amount of contact. That's a call that they let go. In my opinion, like 7 times out of 10. So, um, little things like that here and there make you kind of pause a little bit and kind of point out the rest. But other than that, there wasn't anything too egregious. I think a lot of people just have a disagreement with the way the game was called. And I have that same disagreement. I think that it should be more physical in the playoffs. But, it is what it is. And, as for the third down, where they, had the little mishap with calling the play dead, they did end up getting the stop on the next, on the next set of downs. So, you can get mad about it if you want, if you're a Bengals fan. Obviously, you have a right to, but that isn't what ultimately decided the game.
Right. And one last thing on that. We won't. This is more like off-season conversation for. It seems like we have this conversation almost every off-season about a particular rule or the referees. Or last year it was the overtime rules, right, with associated with the playoffs. It seems like every year we have this conversation, and that's not going to stop. I mean, every year something's going to come up that will need to be talked about during the off-season, I feel like. But at the end of the day, I just feel like the outrage towards referees nowadays more prevalent, if you will, because now you have fans who have money on these games, betting on these games. And some of these outcomes, although they're not solely decided by some of these calls, I mean, fans are passionate, and that's what they go to. And the referees are often the scapegoat. And when you have money on the line, sometimes a lot of money on the line, it can be. That's why you see. I think you see more outrage now than you did maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly, and social media as well, and it's just all at a higher magnitude because the game is more global than it has ever been. So, um, it's just all taken up to 11 in terms of just the scale of how big some of these calls are. But let's get into the actual game. Um,
Yeah.
I think some of the discourse around, Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes, I don't think you can really, you know, decide if one quarterback is better than the other based off one game. But I think Patrick Mahomes still has that crown. I think it was made pretty clear. Um, some of the discourse before the game was like, if Joe Burrow wins, I don't know how you can argue that he's not the best quarterback in the league, and I just don't think that's a fair statement to make based on the resume that Patrick Mahomes has built and seeing the big picture. The fact that he's made 6 straight AFC Championship games and has consistently been a top seed, out like the 1 seed or a 2 seed each and every single year. So you take that all into account, I think Mahomes is still the top quarterback in football, and he had a amazing game. And going into it, a lot of people were questioning the ankle, and it was just kind of a ticking time bomb. Like people were just waiting for it to start affecting him more, and it just never really did. Um, it was just a showcase of just how far he's come as a quarterback, in my opinion. I think he was really disciplined from in the pocket. He made smart decisions. He was more, um, I don't want to say precise, but he was more willing to nickel and dime down the field rather than go for the big play each and every down. And I think that really paid dividends because Andy Reid was able to just dial up these plays on these short passes, and um, they were just able to move up and down the field. Obviously, the second half, things closed up a little bit more on the Cincinnati defense side of things. But overall, I just think Patrick Mahomes, um, he played an amazing game.
Yeah, absolutely. We were chatting during the game, and look, I'm not saying that the injury wasn't as bad as it was initially reported. And I'm not saying that it still didn't hurt him or affect him during the game. I do think as the game progressed and it got colder, I think the cold weather may have had like a bigger factor, and he may have re-aggravated it a little bit on one of the throws later in the game. I did see a couple instances where he was wincing a little bit, sort of walking a little bit funny. But I made a comment to you. I said something along these lines. I said, I think the Mahomes injury to his ankle has been a little bit overblown by the media in particular. Because I just think that when you have a coach like Andy Reid, who, I mean, leave it to him to make a game plan suited for Mahomes and what he was capable of doing in this game, which is a lot more than I think a lot of people expected. And then also just like the way he was playing, he was stepping into the throws a little bit more, I think. And I don't think it affected him all too much. So I'm not saying that it wasn't as bad as initially. I never had a high ankle sprain. I don't know. I'm sure it hurts a lot. But at the same time, some players are just, you have great players and then you have greater than great. I think there's another level. There's levels to things. And I think Joe Burrow is great. I think he's going to get he's going to win a Super Bowl in his career. He's still very young. He's right up there in the conversation with Patrick Mahomes. But to play along with the point you made, Mahomes is just a little bit different when it comes to just overcoming what you think he can't overcome. I think at this rate, now there will be a conversation if he ends up losing the Super Bowl, because even though you've made it to now, what is it? 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. Even though you made it, you got to come out with a couple more rings. I know he's still young, only 27. He's going to get to more. The thing that really stands out to me is that he's yet to play a road playoff game, which is pretty insane. He's always been hosting the AFC Championship game, I believe. Or maybe they played one in New England. I forget. But
no, they didn't.
I believe he's hosted all of his playoff games, which is just insane. 5 conference championship games. Every single year he started, he's been in the conference championship. Now this is his 3rd Super Bowl in 4 years. And I do think that the return of Mecole Hardman gave them just another dimension, added just one extra needed dimension to this offense that they may have been missing. Not necessarily that their offense was bad the past couple of weeks, but this just made it better. And I think that Mahomes, you saw it. I mean, he completed every single pass he threw from outside the tackle box. Outside the box, he was 6 for 6. On the run, he was 6 for 6. And on extended dropbacks, he was 6 for 6, according to Next Gen Stats. And a lot of people that's what they were questioning, his ability to make plays and extend plays outside the pocket with that ankle. And so it was just his greatness that I think was the separator. Ultimately, when it comes down to the call at the end of the game, the Joseph Ossai play, I think it was a clear penalty. I think Mahomes was out of bounds, and Ossai needs to be more aware situationally. But sometimes in the heat of the moment, things happen. And I do believe with all the things that went on afterwards with the Jermaine Pratt social media video, to all the other Bengals teammates sort of rallying around Joseph Ossai, I do think this will be something that he comes back and makes amends for next year. As a Texas fan, it hurt me a little bit to see the side of him basically hysterical on the sidelines after he made that mistake. I do credit him for standing in front of the media for however long he did, answering questions. I think that just shows that he wants to be accountable. And up until that point, he was playing a really good game. And I just feel for the guy. But at the same time, 2 things can be true at once. You can feel for the guy and this and that, and maybe you got to swallow your whistle here and there if you're the referees. But at the same time, Mahomes was clearly out of bounds, and you just got to be better. So I do think Joseph Ossai will come back and be better than that. I don't want him to be remembered as sort of this playoff GOAT in another way. Not the greatest of all time, but sort of that sort of thing. I don't think he will be, but this was just a matter of the Bengals, I believe, had their chances. They did, I'd say, a really good job of blanketing these Chiefs receivers all game long. They started to sit on some of the shorter routes. But to me, it was Patrick Mahomes' ability to extend plays better than we thought. The addition of Mecole Hardman, just adding another weapon into that mix. The greatness of, once again, Travis Kelce, who tied Rob Gronkowski for all-time postseason touchdown catches, second on that list behind Jerry Rice. And then on the defensive side, it was Chris Jones. He absolutely pretty much wrecked this game. 2 sacks, which I believe were his first 2 sacks in the postseason, which was really surprising. And then the back end for the Chiefs continued to play really well, particularly those rookies. They carried over that performance from Buffalo into the Bengals game. So give them credit, and give Steve Spagnuolo, who's a big game defensive coordinator, just like his counterpart, Lou Anarumo. I think both of them did a great job from a defensive game planning standpoint. The Chiefs just made a couple more plays.
Yeah, exactly. And there were a few throws that Joe Burrow made that were just sick. I mean, I think of the one to Jamar Chase where it hit him in the helmet. I mean, you can't draw up a better throw than that. Oh, in the hole shot, 40 yards down the field from a pocket that's getting closed in. I mean, that was just insanely good. And then there was one in the red zone. I believe it was I believe it was T. Higgins, left corner of the end zone. He throws it before he was even out of his break, and
Mm.
it hits him in the hands. It was really tight defense, but it did go through his hands, and um, there were moments that in this game that would have really given the Bengals the chance to take it, but it was just the too many field goals, too much settling in the red zone. And you just got to give credit to that Chiefs defense because that same offensive line the week before was able to dominate the Bills up front, and they just had no chance against this Chiefs group.
Right. So before we conclude this episode, like we sort of did with the Sean Payton trade to the Broncos, just give your 1 to 2 minute initial feelings slash thoughts on this Super Bowl matchup of the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles.
Well, I think there's a lot that needs to play out in terms of the injury side of things in the next couple of weeks, particularly for Kansas City in their weapons department. I think Patrick Mahomes will be fine, but they lost McCall Hardman, they lost Kadarius Toney in that game, and to close that game out, you had Sky Moore in there, and then another player that I believe was on their practice squad for most of the year. So that was not ideal. So they're gonna have to, get healthy a little bit over these next 2 weeks. That's the first thing I'll say. The next thing is this Eagles team. It just they're stacked all over the place, and I'll just say they're the better overall roster. I think
Yeah.
that's fair to say. Um, it's just all going to come down to Jalen Hurts, in my opinion. If he's able to play efficient and win with his arm, because I think ultimately that's what Steve Spagnuolo is going to make him do, win with his arm. And you kind of saw him go back to some of his early career tendencies in that NFC Championship game a few times. Um, first read and then run, first read and then run. So if he's not able to be patient in the pocket, go through his progressions, and gets a little bit rattled, then that will not bode well for the Eagles. Because the Eagles, that's the one thing they got to do. They got to score points because no matter how good this Eagles defense is, Patrick Mahomes is going to get his. We know that. I think it's going to be a fantastic Super Bowl. Um, I'm hoping for a close game, but I'm not going to make a prediction. I'm just going to say this Eagles defense, I think a lot of people are underrating it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fantastic matchup. There are some health questions on both sides of the ball. I think Mahomes this next week and a half will definitely be beneficial for him. I mean, you saw what was it, 7 days could do for him, 7, 8 days could do for him. So what's another 10 to 12 days going to do for him from an ankle perspective, plus what they can do with medicine nowadays? I mean, that's something to watch. It'll be interesting to see what the reports are as we get later into this week and early into next week, which is game week, by the way. Um, what that looks like for the Chiefs' perspective, and then from an Eagles' perspective, they're pretty much healthy. There are a couple guys with bumps and bruises here and there, but they actually had, I believe, all 22 of their starters available for Sunday's matchup with the 49ers, and that's sort of unheard of this time of year. Come conference championship, late deep playoff run time, and even going into the Super Bowl. So I do agree with you. Not going to break it down too much, but the Eagles do have the better overall roster. But I think the difference here I think what the difference could be is obviously Jalen Hurts on the Eagles side. And then let's see what this Chiefs defensive front, particularly Chris Jones, and how they match up with this Eagles offensive line, which has just been absolutely dominant to this point. That will be certainly a fun matchup to watch. On the interior in particular, we have Landon Dickerson, who I believe hurt himself a little bit later in that game. But, I mean, Lane Johnson, the whole crew for the Eagles. I think that matchup will be fantastic. But we'll get into all of that next week. Storylines, X's and O's, probably even some prop bets as well in our predictions for the actual game. We'll have that all for you next week. But I think that's going to do it for this episode.
Yeah, exactly. Episode 145. Make sure to leave a like on the video if you're on YouTube. And just remember, we're available on all audio platforms. If you're not able to, catch up with all the episodes on YouTube, you can go over to Apple, Spotify, all those different platforms and listen to it, to the audio version. If you're over there, leave a 5-star rating and review. That would really be appreciated. Even if you're watching on YouTube, if you could go over to Apple and leave a 5-star rating, that really helps us get recommended to new people. And that's ultimately what we want the most right now. And then, we're going to be doing some content on Patreon also in the next few weeks leading into F1 season. Haas just released their car. That was the first car release of the new season. So we're getting closer and closer to that. And NBA and college basketball are really ramping up as well. So we're going to be covering those topics as well. And then I'll let Michael sign us off.
We haven't talked about it, but keep an eye out for a full basketball episode, either later this afternoon, this evening, tonight maybe, or even tomorrow. But for now, that's going to do it. We got to figure out the details for that off air. But for now, that's going to do it. And just like the 49ers season, they had a fantastic one. And the Bengals, they also had a fantastic season. We are going, gone. Peace out.